You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanders,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is...
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm super excited to have Dirk Cussler on the show with me today. He is the author of the brand new book, which was just released, Clive Cussler's The Devil's Sea, which if you are a Dirk Pitt fan, this is the 26th edition in the series. Is that right, Dirk?
Yes, it is. Number 26.
That is crazy. I've seen Dirk Pitt novels, nearly all of my adult life and nearly my whole life, it feels like, to have a new edition of this and so many in the series, that is amazing. How does it feel to keep a character like Dirk going?
It's a challenge, but it is kind of daunting when you look back at it. I think my father's first book was published in 1973, so it is pretty crazy to think we're scratching up on 50 years of the same series.
That is crazy. Yeah. Dirk, but before we get into the new book and stuff, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, it's funny. I had a career in corporate finance before I got into writing, so I didn't have a burning desire to be a writer when I was young. But I will say, having grown up with a writer as a father, it was not a foreign concept. And in fact, I always thought at some point I'll write a book. I didn't expect to be writing the Dirk Pitt series, but I figured I'd be writing a book. And maybe there's some osmosis to that too, because one of my earliest memories is as a child, we lived in a 3-bedroom house, and I had 2 sisters who had a room together, and I had my own room being the boy, but it was also my father's den. And he worked in advertising, but he came home at night when he decided to start writing, and he would work in the evenings when I went to bed. And so some of my earliest memories are falling asleep with him sitting in the chair 3 feet away with a yellow legal pad, plotting out books and stories, or tapping away on his manual typewriter when he got to the point of actually typing in some of the chapters.
Well, speaking of osmosis and, growing up with a writer, what sort of encouragement did your father give you? I know that was not that writing was not your initial career path. And I think if I remember right, I saw a video several years ago where your dad talked about that you worked in finance and that one day you didn't want to do that anymore. And he had the idea, well, why don't you write the next Dirk novel? And kind of this handing off, but it felt to me like that the handing of that off to you was a very natural and organic thing, that it wasn't, some great family scheme that you had, that was, what kind of encouragement did your dad offer to you other than, just kind of being in his presence and being in the presence of a writer that, these things just kind of naturally wear off? But did he ever encourage you to, that I think you have a story in you or anything like that?
Well, it was actually his idea to pass the series on to me. I had taken a severance, and I was looking at something different to do. And I was working with one of his other co-writers. We were kicking around the idea of doing a nonfiction historical treatment on aviation, of all things. And it was at that point my mother had passed, and I think he had felt a little burnout as well. And he approached me with the thought of, hey, would you like to take on writing the Pitt books? And honest to God, it wasn't something I had expected or planned to do. And I think I readily accepted. I mean, such an offer with a lot of naivety. But he was always so encouraging. And I look back and I laugh, and even on the other 8 books I've written together with him, he always had such a light hand. I expected him, especially on the first one, to be more critical and maybe a little bit heavier-handed, since I was his son of all things, trying to take on his legacy. But it wasn't the case at all, and he was always very positive and encouraging, and it just kind of was a sort of a seamless transition, odd as it sounds.
I can only imagine. Um, it's a fascinating story. Like you said, you kind of expect that he would be harder on you, because you're his son, obviously. But there's a kind of a quiet confidence in that he believed in your storytelling ability. That had to feel unimaginably great to have that kind of confidence from such a writer of such renown. That's almost incomprehensible to think about.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think he had more confidence than I did, and but it was such a great influence, and maybe just having grown up on his works, I probably had an inbred advantage. Certainly, coming of age, reading his books while I was growing up. He was certainly the foremost author in my mind, and not only that, but just knowing him, knowing who he was, and what was important to him, and his character, and how he, in a sense, is sort of Dirk Pitt in so many ways. So I think just knowing him so well maybe was very helpful in terms of writing the books, and just sort of knowing what was important to him, and maybe, I don't know, feeling the same way, I guess, in terms of telling a story.
Sure. Dirk Pitt, with the new book, The Devil's Sea, is the 26th book in the Dirk Pitt series, as we mentioned. With a character that is as long running as Dirk is, there's an kind of a built-in audience for the book, obviously, because there's lots and lots of fans that have been following along for decades. But for a new reader who comes to the Dirk Pitt series and picks up The Devil's Sea, and it looks like a fascinating story, and there's an interesting plot that the book dives into. How accessible is this series for new readers, for people that are just discovering the Dirk Pitt character and all of his the people around him and the adventures that he goes on? I mean, Clive kind of set the he really defined what an adventure thriller is. But with a long-running character like this, how accessible is it for new readers?
Oh, I think they're all very standalone books. So I think it's very easy to pick up The Devil's Sea, or really any of the books, and just jump right in. The stories are not sequential, so they don't really key in from one to the next. And yes, you might learn a little bit more about the characters, and I suppose that's maybe one of my challenges after so many books have been written, is to perhaps maybe gloss over some of the recurring characters that have been introduced so many years ago, because I feel like I know them so well. Maybe I don't have to describe them in as much detail as a cold reader coming in. But as I say, you don't need to start from the beginning. You don't need to start in the middle. Any one of the books, I think, stands on their own merit individually, and hopefully are fully entertaining to read as they are.
In any list that you look at of writers that are folks that you should study for plot, Clive Cussler is always mentioned on those lists. When you begin a book, and one great thing about the Dirk Pitt novels is there's always an historical element, and then there's some cutting edge science, and then there's the human element, where these things kind of all crash in together. When you start thinking of a new book, what are some of the first things that you start looking? Do you find an intriguing historical mystery? Do you kind of play the what if game of, what would happen if this happened? And then, how do we bring in modern technology? How does the premise of a book start to take shape?
Just exactly that, Hank. Right on the money. It's usually it begins with a historical premise, and as you say, trying to find maybe a historical mystery that can be parlayed into a full story with some modern hooks to it. I will say on the Devil's Sea, it was actually sort of geographic, is where my probably initial start was. I thought, all the Pitt books, there's really been no scenes or action that have taken place in the Himalayas. So I thought, well, maybe that would be maybe a starting point. And I started, as I looked at that, I read some books on Tibet and some of the history of Tibet. Read the 7 Years in Tibet. I found this other great story about a B-17 crew in World War II that was flying the hump. They were transporting supplies from India over to China for the Nationalist Chinese fighting against Japan. And they had been blown off course in this storm and lost radio contact. And they ended up flying 300 miles out of the way and bailed out over Tibet. And it was just fascinating that at that point in time, what a closed country, a closed society Tibet was. Virtually very few people came across the borders. There were no Westerners to speak of in the entire country. Very, very restricted, very closed country, and just very kind of fascinating account of these American pilots and flyers that had to make their way. They were brought into the capital and made their way out of the country, and that sort of set the stage for looking at some of the other history, and which ended up bringing into the book is with the Dalai Lama and his fleeing into exile in the late 50s when the Chinese came in with their military and were most likely going to arrest him and put him in jail to remove him from power. I just thought was sort of another compelling point in history, and I sort of drew on that, I guess, for developing the prologue and the initial story.
So what is there's always kind of an inciting incident that kind of kicks off the story, that kicks off the treasure hunt, if you will, and the adventure that follows. What was that? I know what you just talked about, Tibet and the Dalai Lama, but there's an artifact that comes into play here. What is that artifact, and how does it really kick off the story?
Right. So the Dalai Lama relies upon an oracle. There's a state oracle called the Nichang Oracle, and there's an individual who is a medium. He puts on this massive headdress and communicates with the spiritual entity and provides advice to the Dalai Lama. And one of his key roles is when the Dalai Lama passes, is the oracle helps identify where the next reincarnated Dalai Lama will be found. And the elder lamas, like in the case of the Dalai Lama the 14th, the current one, the oracle at the time identified, I think, a town way out in the sticks of Western Tibet, and some elders went out there and found a small boy, and they performed some tests to determine whether he was the true Dalai Lama. And then, of course, he is raised within the monks in the monastery. So I play on that, and again, going back to the era when he was evacuating the capital Lhasa in 1958, that I have a crew of Tibetan guerrillas that are trained by the CIA, which is based on fact. But I have them fly in and with the intent of secretly evacuating the Dalai Lama before the Chinese can capture him. And they unfortunately arrive a little too late. The Dalai Lama's already departed, but they do instead, we're going to retrieve the oracle as well, who's also gone. But they retrieve a statue in the monastery that was critical to the oracle and his ability to communicate and help him identify ultimately the next Dalai Lama. So they spirit away this statue, but unfortunately the plane crashes on the way out. And so that sets up for a chase to try and find this artifact that has significant spiritual significance to the Tibetan Buddhists and also the Chinese, for both reasons of political control over the next Dalai Lama, or the selection of the Dalai Lama. And then I also tie it in just for fun into the sort of a technological aspect that relates to another subplot in the story.
Dabble is a proud sponsor of Author Stories. Dabble is an easy-to-use cloud-based writing tool that gives writers a way to organize, plot, and create amazing stories wherever they are. Write in our desktop app on your Mac or Windows computer, tablet, or mobile device. Dabble syncs your latest version with the cloud on all your devices. Write anywhere and anytime inspiration strikes. We got you. Dabble is my preferred writing tool, and I think it will be yours as well. Visit dabblewriter.com for your free trial. You have an amazing story idea. You execute the writing and editing flawlessly, and now the only thing missing are readers. We can help you go from author to author superhero with Story Origin. Story Origin is a one-stop shop for marketing tools with a community of amazing authors working together to find reviewers, build mailing lists, increase sales, and collect feedback from beta readers. Everything an author needs, all in one place, from providing review copies or beta copies, reader magnets to ensure you stay connected with readers, easily distribute audio promo codes, universal retail links to send readers directly to the proper point of purchase, or provide direct download links for members of your mailing list. Story Origin has all the tools you need in one easy-to-use site. Use the promo code ASP21 at checkout when subscribing to the yearly plan, and you will get 10% off your first year. This code will expire December 31st, so hurry over and subscribe now. StoryOriginApp.com.
One of the best things about a Dirk Pitt novel is not just Dirk and his ability to find trouble all over the world, but it's this unique cast of characters that come along with Dirk. And we've got Numa and all the people involved with that, and then all of the other people in Dirk's life. In this book, you bring in Dirk's children, Summer and Dirk Jr. As someone who knows a little bit about joining the family business, what did adding these characters do for the story and for Dirk? As a very human character that we love to go on adventures with.
Well, I suppose that's sort of the bit of a character arc of Dirk Pitt himself. In the first books, he's sort of a swinging singles bachelor, dating exotic women in the course of his adventures. And then later on, he ultimately marries his girlfriend, Lauren Smith. And so in Valhalla Rising, which I guess was about 10 or 11 books ago, my father introduced the children who appear as adults in the story and begin to have roles in the adventures going forward. So they've grown up a little, I think, over the course of the last 8 or 10 books. And originally they were about college age, I think, when they were introduced. So now they're maybe a little bit older and more mature and able to help, more capable, I guess, of handling adventure on their own. So certainly in this book, they do, like in the last couple, take on one of the subplots. And in this case, they're the ones who end up in the Himalayas in India, trying to pursue the wreckage of this airplane and locate this statue.
Dirk, we talked earlier about you kind of taking the reins of Dirk Pitt from your father, and the grace that he gave you to kind of find the story for yourself. What sort of advice did he give you? Was there ever looking back, do you remember any times where he kind of steered you, toward, this is how I do things. This is an easy way I found to do, or maybe not an easy way, but this is the way I do it. Were there any things that he gave you that shape you as a writer?
Not a great deal in terms of actual mechanics and specifics of writing. Certainly from a creative standpoint, he was such an imaginative fellow. And he certainly was able of thinking outside the box so much in terms of developing plots and so forth. I think his greatest encouragement or maybe philosophy was really to sort of have fun with it and to make it entertaining. So he certainly had a sharp eye to cut out maybe descriptions that run too much. As an author, you tend to research things and you become a minor expert on a topic, history or
Sure.
technology or something. And so you tend to maybe overrun or want to show off your brief knowledge that you've acquired. And but the reader doesn't need to know all that. They just need to know what it is, to keep the story moving along. So he was very good at that, I think, in terms of trying to focus on keeping the story moving, keeping the pace strong, and not get bogged down in what he used to call deadwood that really didn't help the story. But I'd say his most lasting impact is really just kind of trying to maintain that sense of fun in the story. He used to have a saying. He says, "Well, if it ain't fun, it ain't worth doing." And so I kind of try to keep that in mind while writing the books as well, and certainly want to make the stories fun to read for the reader.
Speaking of that sense of fun, Dirk Pitt has been compared a lot in the past to another character that we love, and that's Indiana Jones, who mostly has had, everything we know about Indiana Jones, comes from a handful of movies, and we have so much more that we know about Dirk Pitt and adventures that we've gone on. How do you see the comparisons between those two characters, and what do you think? Why do you think Dirk Pitt is a better realized character, maybe?
Oh, well, they're both really sort of iconic American heroes, I guess, and maybe sort of, to some extent reluctant heroes. They both love history. They both love unraveling mysteries. Um, but Pitt, I think, is just I don't know if he's maybe more down to earth, maybe just kind of a more realistic character. You can picture having a beer with Pitt in a bar somewhere. I'm not sure so much with Indiana Jones you would think that. So maybe just a bit more of a common man touch, I think, maybe at the end of the day. Um, but yeah, it's sort of tough comparing a literary character to a film character.
Um, there's been yeah, thrillers are probably more popular now than they've ever been. And a lot of thrillers tend to lean toward the darker side of psychological thrillers, or maybe military thrillers, and there are certain hallmarks that make those types of books what they are. But one thing that we can count on from a Dirk Pitt novel is plenty of action, plenty of adventure. Um, and they don't lean toward the darker side. I mean, like I would hand a Dirk Pitt novel to just about anyone, and that's not to say that they are not fully realized, that they're not full of adult situations and things like that, but um, they're accessible to everyone. What do you think about the thriller genre uh, in as a whole, and where Dirk Pitt fits in the literary landscape of today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a place for all of that. I mean, some people like the more dark psychological thrillers, and but some readers don't. And I think I, I just think back to my father when one I think eye-opening moment for him, and it was one of his a book signing at one of his first books, and a fellow came in and he had his 9-year-old son who wanted an autograph, and I think my father felt sort of embarrassed because in the book there was a minor sex scene and maybe a few bad words, and he, after that it was like, no, that's you don't need that. Okay, you don't need the foul language. You don't need to have sex, and why not make something that everybody can read? That because kids like reading the books too, and so I think from his mind, yeah, he wanted something more wholesome, and I think that just sort of fit his mentality too, and why not reach a broader audience for that as well, I guess.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, the Dirk Pitt novels, especially, as we talked about before, are usually hailed as, a great place to study plot. As a writer, and we talked about kind of the idea of how the plots come about, or what elements you look for to start shaping a plot. How much of the from the writing mechanic standpoint, do you plot out the book before you begin the actual drafting of the book, or what is that process like for you?
Yeah, I have to. I make a rough outline. I don't have the capability, I guess, the mental capability to detail out a full book up front. It just doesn't come that easy or naturally for me. But I do want to have the ending in mind. So typically, as I mentioned, I'll start with a historical premise, and then try and formulate that into something that relates to the modern world. Uh, and at the back of my mind, I need to sort of have the ending in mind. I find that as I go through it, I'll kind of detail the outline maybe step by step as I move forward through the book, uh, and formulate more specifics maybe on the next 100 pages or so as I go. But it gives me some flexibility. I think a lot of times you'll end up kind of veering off in a direction maybe you didn't anticipate at the beginning. Sometimes it drives you into a box too, maybe where you think you're going to go resolve some plot points, and maybe you find that they're more difficult to resolve than you imagined at the beginning, or there's technological limitations and things like that. But for me, that seems to work best. And like I say, as long as I kind of have an ending in mind and a way to get there, then that seems to kind of lay out enough of a path to sort of to work the plot line to the conclusion.
When you talk about sometimes kind of writing yourself into a corner and, well, this didn't wind up the way I kind of envisioned, how many times has it happened the opposite, where kind of following your intuition led you to a place that you couldn't have imagined happening in the plotting, in the outline of the book? Has that ever happened where kind of your subconscious mind has worked out something for you that maybe you think, wow, that was more genius than I thought it could have been?
That hasn't happened often. It's happened a handful of times, and I wish it would happen more, but
yeah, I think every writer wishes that would happen more. But Dirk, what's coming up for Dirk Pitt? With this is the 26th book in the series. Are there still more adventures to be had and things to mysteries to unravel?
I hope so. Yeah, I'm about halfway into the next one. I still have a lot to sort out on that, as we just talked about. But I've got a basic historical premise. I'll just throw out is during World War II in Paris, as the German invasion of France took hold, there was certainly a lot of panic in France and in Paris to preserve their historical and artifacts and artwork. And so certainly for like the Louvre, for example, they boxed up all the famous paintings and shipped them off to the south of France in hidden places to protect them. So I just came up with the thought of, well, what happened if they shuffled off Napoleon out of his tomb so that Hitler couldn't take him, and ended up somewhere unknown. And so fooling around with that as at least a little historical toy anyway in the plot, and then trying to work some ideas off of that right now.
That is a fantastic premise. I can't wait to see where you take that, Dirk. That's going to be amazing. If people are just getting into the Dirk Pitt series and want to dig into all of the books that made him great and all of that, where is a good place for people to start and to get connected with you and with the book series and all of that great stuff?
Yeah, well, it's probably fun to go back to some of his earlier ones. As I mentioned earlier, Raise the Titanic was the one that sort of put him on the map, and that's a good introduction to Pitt. I'd say maybe one or two of my other favorites of his from the early days was Sahara and Inca Gold. Now, some people might know Sahara from the movie with Matthew McConaughey, and we all like to think the book is so much better than the movie. But that was one of my favorites. So I would recommend that. Maybe it's a good starting point too to get a flavor for what the series is all about.
And they can find all of that at CusslerBooks.com. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And all the back titles are available at Barnes & Noble and the normal online retailers as well.
Excellent. Dirk, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. We're going to send everyone to pick up their copy of The Devil's Sea. Links available in the show notes. Thank you, Dirk, for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you, Hank. It was a real delight talking with you.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
Once and ago, Hulda said, land full of witches. Witches in the sky, in the trees, witches down the well. Justine, a great witch. Many herbs, many friends. One day, curse fall. Everyone die, everyone who believe in hexe. This 1692. Hidden the knowledge is. The appointed hide it. A great curse cast in Salem that year. Legion, she cast curse to kill the day world. In New Amsterdam they not know, only see. Everyone die. What for? They blame Justine. Chased her off. She come here, I think. Hide from witch hunters. You, her blood. Possibly Hulda was correct. I was a witch, just as she was. She promised my magic would come once I was a woman. I cannot say by what steps I came to believe Hulda's seductive promises of power, but I do know the moment when I chose to be a witch, irrevocably and with my whole heart. On the Sunday that Cornelia Van Cortlandt became Cornelia Beekman, the newly wedded pair made their first public appearance at church, their coming out, as was the custom, so that our poor congregation could thoroughly enjoy the spectacle of her bridal finery. The pair arrived late, with the whole bridal party in wedding array. Cornelia wore fawn-colored silk over a light blue damask petticoat. Gerard wore a waistcoat of the same, and a long coat of white broadcloth. After services, the Beekmans graciously shared the leftovers of their wedding feast, serving chicken and ale to the congregation, outside among the graves of the old burying ground. The day was pleasant, and the grass sweet. The tenant farmers and peasant wives stood all hunched about, licking their fingers and making little bows of deference. Cornelia held a bouquet of orange blossoms to her cheek, and everyone agreed that she was the most beautiful young lady in all creation, married to the most good-natured and remarkable man. "That will be you some day," my mother whispered. The sun kissed Gerard's forehead as he reached into his purse and showered the graveyard with coins. All my neighbors fell to their knees at the couple's feet, scrabbling for pennies. Only I remained unbent. I stood, staring daggers into Cornelia, as she accepted a surreptitious kiss from her beautiful husband. Oh, that kiss in the graveyard! A perfect kiss of love and devotion and tribute. She noticed my expression of pain and mistook it for disappointment. "Did you not get a penny, dear?" she said, smiling. "Here you go." She threw her bouquet of orange blossoms to me. I caught it and gave her a tiny bow. Yes, I thought, that would be me some day. I crushed the bouquet to my heart and swore my oath. Cornelia would not win. She was no better than I. I was special, too. I wore no emeralds. I wore no silk, but I trailed fireflies. I deserved such a perfect kiss. I deserved such a perfect man. And if I could not win a god by grace, I would seize one by sorcery.